Monday, the second day of the fire, has come to an end. By nightfall, scraps of scorched silk travel on the strong wind 30 miles west to Beaconsfield, and smoke spreads 50 miles to Oxford. Writer Samuel Pepys reports the front line of the fire is now a mile wide. The blaze overtakes so much of the city that the only man who can save it is the king himself. Charles takes charge and orders 8 command posts to be set up on the western side of the city, where the fire is rapidly headed. Each is responsible for protecting its local area. As the inferno spread across the city, the king and his brother, the Duke of York, took a boat downriver here to Queenhithe, and they threw themselves into tackling the blaze, passing water buckets, helping to operate primitive fire engines, and inspiring the firefighters. We know from eyewitness accounts that this really impressed the king's subjects, which was good news for Charles because he needed his people on his side.
By the time of the fire, Charles had been king for 6 years, returning the monarchy to England after his father, Charles I, was beheaded in 1649. But in these 6 years, he'd only really proved himself in the arts of gambling and womanizing, entertaining his mistresses and drinking buddies here in the undercroft of the banqueting house. Scandal followed scandal. He would have been a tabloid editor's dream.
Now, I loved Charles. There never seemed to be a dull moment when he was around. He might not be the sort of person you'd want to hang out with your daughter, but you'd sure as hell have a good time. But that wasn't exactly the mood in 17th century London. A hedonistic party animal, always looking for fun, wasn't what people wanted in a king. They wanted someone whose finger was on the pulse, someone who could give the country what it needed.
He'd certainly failed a year earlier when London was struck by a devastating plague. Charles's response wasn't to stay and help. Instead, he packed up his things and left the city.
Charles's behaviour during the plague was widely criticised, and by 1666, his reputation was at breaking point. So when the Great Fire came along, rather than leave London and issue orders from afar, he decided to stay and fight, seizing it as the PR opportunity of a lifetime.
This was Charles II's chance to show himself as a man of action who put his people first.
By the afternoon, the blaze reaches Ludgate Hill, encircling the area at the top, the spiritual heart of the city. Here at the top of Ludgate Hill is the most significant building in the whole city. More important than the livery company halls, more important than the Royal Exchange. It's London's very own cathedral, St. Paul's. And on the third day of the fire, the flames are getting closer and closer.
The old medieval St. Paul's had been standing for almost 600 years. That's longer than the rebuilt St. Paul's we have today. It was not only a place of worship, but also a bustling hub for business. At the time of the Great Fire, St. Paul's was the centre of England's book trade. Desperate to save their stock, the booksellers decided to hide everything underground inside St. Paul's crypt. Thousands and thousands of books were rushed into the building, but the cathedral was being repaired and was covered in wooden scaffolding. Tragically, the scaffolding caught fire and St. Paul's went up in flames.
The fire around the cathedral was so hot that the very stones exploded like grenades. As one eyewitness put it, great beams and massy stones fell on the pavement and broke through into the crypt, destroying all the books.
Everywhere around here, buildings are on fire. St. Paul's School, that's burned to the ground. Stationers' Hall, that's burned to the ground. The Royal College of Physicians at Amen Corner, that's burned to the ground. And still the wind continues to blow, fanning the flames. The fire's now reached the point that firefighters call fully developed. It's at its hottest and it's most dangerous. St. Paul's is still in flames, and so is the city's economy. In this mad panic, Londoners cast the net widely for someone to blame.
Against all common sense, Thomas Farriner, the baker from the Pudding Lane area, is not the first to be accused. And when he finally has to answer for himself, he quickly points the finger at someone else.
Thomas Farriner turned out to be a master at passing the buck, and you can imagine his delight when the authorities began turning up the heat on a 26-year-old watchmaker's son from Normandy called Robert Hubert. Hubert was French, he claimed to be Catholic, and like many terrified foreigners, he was fleeing the country when he was caught. None of that boded well, but the thing that really damned him was when asked about who started the Great Fire of London, he confessed.
It wasn't long before Robert Hubert was on trial and facing the death penalty, and Farriner was off the hook. Amazingly, a record of Hubert's trial still exists. It's kept here at the London Metropolitan Archives, and I've been granted special permission to see it. Dr. Jacob Field is a specialist on this period and knows all about poor Robert Hubert.
Jacob, what do we have here?
So we have a document here, 350 years old, which is the original trial record of the case against Robert Hubert, the man accused of starting the Great Fire of London.
Well, what does it say?
So it says here, in Latin, which was used in legal records at the time, that Robert Hubert, lately of London, a labourer, diabolically, voluntarily, maliciously and feloniously started the Great Fire by putting a fireball through the window of a bakery on Pudding Lane.
Why did he confess?
Well, this is where the story becomes quite sad and a little tragic. Robert Hubert was someone who was mentally unbalanced, and it's very likely that he did it for attention.
But if, at a distance of 350 years, you can judge that he probably wasn't in a fit mental state to give a confession like this, why did they believe him?
Well, really, they were looking for someone to blame. And also there was another figure who stood to gain by this confession. So have a look at the signatures under the indictment. And these are the people basically saying that this is true and this is what happened. So whose names do you see there?
Thomas Farriner. Thomas Farriner, the baker.
Yes, this is Thomas Farriner, the elder, baker who lives on Pudding Lane. And if you look at some other names, who else do you see?
We've got Hannah Farriner and Thomas Farriner Jr. So the whole Farriner family is testifying against him.
So, that's right. So all of the Farriners are basically coming to court and saying, we had nothing to do with this. There's no way it's our fault that the fire started. And this man, Robert Hubert, started it all with throwing a fireball through our window.
So they're behind this miscarriage of justice. They really are the bakers from hell, aren't they? They don't come out of this well at all.
Robert Hubert paid the ultimate price and was hanged at Tyburn Gallows on the 29th of October, 1666. The Great Fire of London had claimed yet another victim.
With St Paul's crumbling in flames, the fire now gets as far as the law courts at Temple. This is over 1.5 miles from the Pudding Lane area where it began, and the fire just keeps spreading. But now the fire's coming towards me, heading west along the Strand. The King's brother, the Duke of York, is struggling desperately to fight it. And all around here, houses are being torn down to stop the fire from spreading any further down there, towards the King's Palace at Whitehall. It's now the end of the third day, and all over London, the fire isn't showing any signs of slowing down. I've come to the eastern part of the city, to one of Britain's greatest landmarks, the Tower of London. Now, at the time of the Great Fire, this place was already nearly 600 years old, but so far it had escaped any damage because strong winds have been blowing the fire west through the city, where it's been devouring everything in its path. But on the evening of Tuesday, the 4th of September, the wind changes direction. Now blowing from west to east, the fire is heading straight for the Tower of London. Not only is the tower a symbol of security for the whole nation, it's actually a massive ammunition store. There are over 9,000 barrels of gunpowder in there. If the Great Fire reaches the tower, it's going to go up in one vast, terrifying explosion.